Welcome, age of vintage society. Jerry Lewis's irrepressibly zany persona made him one of the most famous people on earth. He was one of America's most influential comedians. This video analyses the complex, sometimes disturbing world of Jerry Lewis, from his rise to fame and his philanthropic work to the dark side of his career and personal life. Why Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin's legendary split left open wounds. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. The history of Hollywood is filled with great comedy teams, some of whom loved each other dearly, others who seemed to genuinely despise each other, and still others that began from a place of mutual admiration, grew to love one another, and ultimately fell into acrimony. Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, collectively known as Martin and Lewis, fall into that category. Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin were, in my own humble opinion, the greatest comedy team in the history of show business. There was something so electric about Dean and Jerry. It was a new concept, a fresh idea, teaming up with a handsome, smooth, ultra-cool singer with a funny guy, his antithesis, his pesky kid brother, a monkey. Somehow the mix worked perfectly. They met as nobodies, became best friends and superstars, but ended up refusing to speak to each other. Dean co-starred as the charismatic big brother figure with whom Jerry spent a crucial decade in one of the most popular comedy acts in entertainment history. Dean was Jerry's hero, ideal model chum, and chaperone. Jerry was nobody until he met Dean, and, to be fair, vice versa. Coming from literally nowhere, the pair rode a skyrocketing 10-year career that made them staples of American showbiz for the rest of their lives. They met when they were just two guys scuffling for a break in Times Square, and they helped forge a new brand of popular entertainment suited to the post-war mood. By the time of their parting, they were superstars with a chasm of cold space between them, and then, as if paying a price for their success, they avoided each other assiduously and spoke perhaps 2 or 3 dozen times over the next 4 decades. Their combination was a new concept when it started, teaming up a smooth, ultra-cool singer with a goofy comedian, and somehow the mix worked perfectly, but their relationship was far from harmonious. Jerry Lewis had a blistering career that lasted more than 6 decades, but his personal life often made headlines for the wrong reasons. He held the world spellbound with his magical talent, is credited as one of the pioneers of modern-day comedy in Hollywood, but his life beyond the screen was more interesting. In America, Jerry Lewis is still an embarrassing and unexplained paradox, often ridiculed, awaiting a persuasive critical champion. This incredible gulf can in part be explained by American access on television talk shows and Lewis's annual muscular dystrophy telethon, to Lewis's contradictory public persona. Egotistical yet insecure, insulting yet sentimental, juvenile yet adult, emotionally naked yet defensive. Were not the real Lewis apparently so hard to love, the celluloid Lewis might be loved all the more. And yet a Lewis cult thrives among American cinephiles, and certainly The Bellboy, The Errand Boy, The Nutty Professor, and Which Way to the Front appear today to be among the most interesting and ambitious American films of the 1960s. His name at birth was Joseph Levitch. He eventually stopped calling himself Joseph and Joey as he got older, to avoid being confused with Joe E. Lewis and Joe Louis. His father Daniel was an actor and master of ceremonies who performed under the name Danny Lewis. His mother Rachel was a piano player for the New York City radio station. He started performing along with his parents when he was 5 years old. Lewis became a character as early as his teenage years. He would pull pranks in his neighborhood, like sneaking into kitchens to steal food. In the 10th grade he dropped out of high school, and by age 15 he had already developed his own act. In his record act he would mime lyrics to songs as a phonograph played off stage. Throughout his childhood, Lewis's parents performed a vaudeville song and dance act at resorts in the Catskill Mountains, a circuit known as the Borscht Belt. He did a show at a burlesque house in Buffalo, but it didn't do well, and no more shows were ever booked. To get by, Lewis worked for a while as a soda jerk and a theatre usher at the Paramount Theatre and Loew's Capitol Theatre in New York City. Then, a few wise words from his father's friend put him back on the right path. Max Coleman, a burlesque comedian who had worked with Lewis's father, convinced him to try again. Comedian Irving Kay saw Lewis's record act and how much the audience loved it, and he became Lewis's manager and guardian for his Borscht Belt appearances. The Borscht Belt is a term for the summer resorts in the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York, which were a popular vacation spot for NYC Jews between the 1920s and 1960s. As the world was in the midst of its Second World War, Lewis applied to the military, but due to a heart murmur he was rejected. As soon as the war was over in 1945, Lewis met the man who would become his brother from another mother. Lewis was newly married with a kid on the way, and he was trying to make his name as an oddball comic when he crossed paths with Martin, who instantly captivated him. Men don't like to admit it, but there's something about a truly handsome guy who also happens to be truly masculine, what they call a man's man. That's as magnetic to us as it is to women. That's what I want to be like, you think. Maybe if I hang around with him, some of that'll rub off on me. In Martin, who was about 9 years older, Lewis, an only child, found an older brother who seemed far more confident and sophisticated than he did as a geeky, insecure teen. The truth is, funny sentences were always running through my brain. I thought funny, but I was ashamed of what would come out if I spoke. That nasal kid's voice. So I was funny on stage, but I was only part funny. I was still looking for the missing piece. Martin was the missing piece, playing the suave straight guy to Lewis's crazy buffoon. They quickly went from nightclubs to radio to television to movies. The name Martin and Lewis became synonymous with a kind of high-low comedic assault that merged banter and vaudeville. The legend of this duo, who were one of the biggest acts of the 1950s, sometimes simplifies the two men into Martin as the dull, crooning dreamboat and Lewis as the hyperactive monkey, to use the term Lewis mockingly ascribed to himself. Those simplifications did a disservice to both men. Over the next 60 years I would come to understand it better and better, he explained of Martin's talent. The vast majority of comedians with good rhythm use beats, small hesitations, often with some comic business or other, to set up their jokes. Dean didn't use beats. I was in the presence of magic. For the next 10 years, Martin and Lewis turned out one silly film after the next, starting with My Friend Irma in 1949 and including The Caddy, The Stooge, Artists and Models and Partners. None of their films grossed less than $5 million, a handy sum in those days. But eventually egos got in the way. On film, Martin may have been the cooler, older brother, but behind the scenes Lewis had all the control, longing to be seen as the true genius. Not only were the two performers pleasant to look at, but they also had a unique quality to their act. They played to each other, ad-libbing improvisational segments during their planned routines. The two quickly became very popular, first with their nightclub act, and then as stars of their own radio program called The Martin and Lewis Show. 1948 was when they made their debut on Toast of the Town, later called The Ed Sullivan Show. By 1950, Martin and Lewis were on the Colgate Comedy Hour. Their Comedy Hour shows involved stand-up dialogue, songs and dancing from their nightclub act and movies. By 1951, Lewis and Martin were popular throughout the country. Their appearance at the Paramount Theatre in New York made them a cultural phenomenon. The pair went on to star in 15 or so feature-length movies, including At War with the Army, The Caddy and You're Never Too Young. In later years, both Lewis and Martin were frustrated with Paramount Pictures for their formulaic and stale film choices that restricted the comedy duo to narrow and repetitive roles. During the first half of the 1950s, the partnership became strained. Martin's roles in their movies became less important, and Lewis got most of the critical acclaim. In 1954, Look magazine published a publicity photo of them that had cropped Martin out. Their legendary split in 1956 left open wounds, with Martin reportedly telling Lewis, "When I look at you, I see nothing but a dollar sign." Eventually the two simply outgrew one another. For the last 3 years of their partnership, Jerry's almost visceral need to control the act conflicted with Dean's characteristic lassitude. More and more often, writers and directors of Jerry's choosing were shaping their material, while Dean's parts shrank Dean, who had been a blackjack dealer and a boxer before hitting on singing as a career, wasn't blind to Jerry's machinations, and he dismissed his partner's ambitions. But he had people whispering earnestly in his ear that Jerry was holding him back from greater things, and Jerry had sycophants giving him similar advice. They fought openly on film sets and privately behind the scenes. The duo's partnership ended after their final act on July 24, 1956. The men then ventured off into successful solo careers. In the subsequent years they literally didn't speak. Once or twice they collided on the back lot at Paramount or in some Vegas green room, but often they deliberately ducked one another. In 1960, when Dean went off rat packing, Jerry was persona non grata, and it's a sign of his hurt and resentment that he responded to the Rat Pack's Las Vegas shoot of Ocean's 11 by going to Miami and making a resort hotel movie of his own, The Bellboy. By 1970, Jerry's career had spun out of control in the haze of drug addiction and the changing fashions in comedy, but Dean was a bigger star than ever, with a smash-hit weekly TV series and a film and recording career to rival Frank Sinatra's. Lewis turned to write, produce and direct a lot of his own films, but after the breakup with Martin, he was in a crisis state, feeling completely unconfident on his own. "I was unable to put one foot in front of the other with any confidence. I was completely unnerved to be alone," he was quoted as saying. He and his wife, Patty Palmer, went to Las Vegas. There he got an urgent request from his friend, Sid Luft, Judy Garland's husband and manager, saying she couldn't perform that night because of strep throat. Lewis was asked to fill in. After his most popular and successful work, The Nutty Professor, Lewis's career did not achieve the spark and fame he enjoyed, and as a result he took a 10-year break from appearing in movies. Over the next 5 years, Lewis developed a slicker, more sophisticated stage persona and would continue to play Vegas until 2016. On screen, he made a go of it in such films as The Delicate Delinquent and Rockabye Baby. Lewis even had a million-selling single in the Rockabye Your Baby title track, which led to several albums on Decca Records. He then extended his efforts into writing, producing and directing films, signing what was then a mammoth $10 million deal with Paramount. The first two, 1961's The Ladies' Man and 1962's The Errand Boy, showed him at his best. His talents also dovetailed with director Frank Tashlin's style in films such as Cinderfella and The Disorderly Orderly. The Nutty Professor was his biggest success ever, grossing $19 million, but by then his mugging and exaggerated body gyrations had become out of control and had the syrupy moments in his films. Lewis signed a non-exclusive deal with Columbia that resulted in several uninspired films such as Three on a Couch, The Big Mouth and Don't Raise the Bridge, Lower the River. Even Lewis had to admit, Jerry Lewis is never just okay or adequate. He's either very funny or he's awful. While Americans largely dismissed him, Lewis had developed a following at French film journals, Carrière du Cinéma and Positif. It's a great story, a showbiz epic of brothers who find and then lose one another, and in its heroic dimension it stands in stark contrast to the actual record Dean and Jerry leave behind. Even the best of their film work is formulaic and lazy, and their TV appearances only hint at the brilliance that endeared them to a nation. Nothing can compete with the truth of what the two achieved, and what they felt for one another during and after it. Factual accuracy aside, Jerry's no doubt being emotionally honest in Dean and Me, in giving us more insight into this amazing, unlikely marriage, and how could he not? He meets out showbiz gold. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Jerry Lewis? Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin were the reigning goofball team of 1950s cinema.